I think the intention of the briefing is to give you a comprehensive overview of what has been our findings when we have visited the 15 power stations across the length and breadth of our country, primarily located in Mpumalanga. I'm sure you know that a significant proportion of our coal-fired power stations are located in Mpumalanga. I think of the total fleet that we have visited, 11 of those are located in Mpumalanga. And just to give you a sense, I mean, I'm talking about 15 of these stations plus Kubek, which is our only nuclear power station. And just to thank the members of the media who were able to join us on the visit to a power station, because we had committed when the ministry was introduced by President Ramaphosa that we'll do everything possible to make sure that there's high levels of transparency in our communication to the state of the grid, the generation side in this instance, to the whole country, so that there's a better appreciation of the extent of the challenge or the crisis that is confronting us. So I'm going to map and take you through what these observations are. And they are very difficult and hard choices that have to be made going forward into the future, into the immediate, medium and long term. And let me hasten to mention that I will be presenting the more detailed comprehensive report to Cabinet. I'm saying more detailed because in that presentation to Cabinet, I'll be mapping out what the choices are that stands before us in order to resolve the load shedding question. But for purposes of this media briefing, communicating to the country, I'm going to, in the course of this presentation, just take you through what some of the options are before you without necessarily stating what the preferred option is, because that's the option, a determination that will be made by the Cabinet. But essentially what is confronting us is the need for us to ensure that everything that we do is in favor of South Africa and her people. So there are overriding considerations outside, if you like, the narrow confines of what is it that ESCOM can offer, but more broadly the conversation is about what is in the best interest of the country to get the economy going. And that conversation essentially is going to be superior or more significant than just a conversation about the ESCOM. So that's the point up there. So it's not about how you preserve, protect, enhance essentially the balance sheet of ESCOM, but it's to make sure that we get sufficient electrons to power the economy and ensure that we resolve load shedding in our country. And let me also just say from the onset that I'm particularly grateful at the support that we have received from Minister Godan throughout all the power stations, all the visits were with the Department of Public Enterprise. It's a very powerful message there because it's an illustration of a joined-up government, just an appreciation that it is important that all the key players in the energy ecosystem are working together to ensure that we address this question. And these observations, I'm confident that are shared by our colleagues at the DDG level, who have been very kind enough to join us at all the visit to the power station. And the other remark just to make at the onset is to thank the board of ESCOM. This is men and women with the impeccable track record as entrepreneurs, business leaders, academics, people who have nothing to offer but their expertise, the skill and time to ensure that the country comes out of a very, very difficult situation. So I want to extend my appreciation to Chairperson of ESCOM, Mr. Makwana, for making it possible that every step that we're taking, we're able to take with us the people of ESCOM, the board in this instance, because I think whilst the board performs the fiduciary duties, responsibilities, responsible for the overall strategy of ESCOM, and the executive authority performs different functions. The DPE, in this instance, Minister Godan, the shareholder representative. The Minister of Electricity is charged with the responsibility of reducing both the intensity and regularity of load shedding. We have been working together in this exercise, so I'm very grateful about what we have been able to achieve out of this exercise. So what is the question that is confronting us? So essentially we have a situation in the country where demand far outstrips supply, and we know that the supply essentially comes from the installed fleet of ESCOM, over 52 gigawatts of generating capacity that is being that has been installed in ESCOM, and we know that if you like, the energy availability factor, that is the efficiency of the operations of this fleet, is now standing on average at about 53%, and that explains why there's that gap, if you like, the deficit between the generation and the demand. And the quest that we are trying to do is to close that gap. Our initial computation suggests that we need something in the order of magnitude of about 6,000 megawatts for us to be able to close this gap. And this is a determination made on summer conditions. I make the point around summer conditions because on average ESCOM can guarantee us about 7,000 megawatts, and we know that the peak demand around the summer is about 32,000 megawatts. And then now we are entering winter, which is going to be a very difficult period, and I'll share with you what our thinking is there. The numbers suggest that historically the average is about 35,000 megawatts, but it can go up to 37,000 megawatts. So if you are sitting at, if you like, a guaranteed supply of 27 megawatts, I said summer conditions were sitting at 32 megawatts. The delta or the difference is about 5,000 megawatts. And if this demand is going to go up to about 37,000 megawatts, the worst case scenario, and we are not able to improve on this 27,000 megawatts, you can see the gap there, the delta grows from 5,000 to 10,000 megawatts. So that's the scale or the magnitude of the challenge that is facing us. There are three ways of resolving this problem. The first one is to ensure that we ramp up generation capacity, and that explains the reason why we have been to ESCOM just to ask the question from the various station managers, what is it that your station is doing unit by unit to ensure that we ramp up this generation so that we are able to close the gap between generation and demand. And then the second option that you can do is to ensure that we bring down this demand. And we know that the system operator, essentially someone who looks after the interest of the grid, to address the low frequency, that is when demand far outstrips supply, to maintain the system at what we call 50 hertz, so that the system doesn't collapse. He introduces a mechanism that we commonly refer to as load shedding, essentially denying, if you like, the servicing of this demand. And that's why we are experiencing various stages of load shedding. So the other option that we can resolve this problem is to bring down demand. So like I said, the first option, ramp up generation. The second option, bring down demand. The third option is our preferred option, is that you do both. You ramp up demand and ramp up generation and reduce demand. But as you reduce demand, you don't undermine the ability of household to meet their daily needs. You don't undermine the ability of commerce and business to operate and meet their commercial targets, so that we get the economy of South Africa going. And we'll share with you what are those interventions that we propose to make on the demand side, so that we are able to balance the equation. There are easy wins on both sides, on the generation side and also on the demand side. I'll expand on what those easy wins are. And then the second point to be made is around the configuration of demand in the country. So we know there's something that we call peak demand. So that's in the morning. So it's a concentrated, if you like, demand on generation. And that is typically around the the period between about 5:30 to about 8 in the morning. So that's when we're preparing to go to school, we're preparing to go to work. We use all types of appliances. So there's pressure on the system. So that's the morning peak. And then there's also the afternoon peak. And we're experiencing the afternoon peak really between around 6 and 8 o'clock in the evening. That's when we're cooking and doing all other activities. So it's concentrated because we do that almost across the country at the same time. And that's an area that requires attention. And when there's that peak in the morning and in the afternoon, so there's a peak concentrated demand, and then it tapers down, it plateaus during the day. I think there's average demand, and then it's going to pick up. There's another crest in the evening. So those are the two, if you like, Manhattans that we have to address, the morning and the afternoon. And how we do that when the demand is not, the generation is not sufficient, Eskom runs what we call the picking plants. That's anchor leg, so that we are able to burn diesel to ensure that we close the gap on the demand, and we don't suffocate the South African economy. And there's another dimension that we know about the profile of generation in the country, is that your solar PV, its contribution to the generation mix essentially starts at 8:30 in the morning, and tapers down at about 4:30 in the afternoon. So 8:30 and 4:30, that's when we have the maximum, if you like, benefit of solar PV. So what is the point I'm trying to make? Is that solar PV, if it's not combined with other technologies such as battery and pump storage, it doesn't resolve your peaks. So essentially it comes at a point where you least need it, and at the point that you want it the most is not available. So the point I'm trying to illustrate there is that your base load, essentially, that is, in our instance, is coal and also nuclear at Quebec, is the one that helps us to address the peaks. And then in an instance where the deficit or the difference is acute, then we run the peaking plants. That's when we get to burn a lot of diesel so that we don't go to higher stages of load shedding. So I thought that I must just share that with you so that there's a great level of appreciation on the contribution of the various energy mixes from a generation point of view, or if you like, technologies that contributes to the generation side. So let me take you through what some of the key finding per stations are, and then I'm also going to make, if you like, general or transversal observations that requires our collective attention, and then also on some of those I'll generate with you what I call options or optionalities, without necessarily telling you what is the preferred option, because it's a purview of a cabinet. I'll make the case there, and of course cabinet will make that determination. So we've categorized these 14 stations into what we call tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. So why do we call them this other? What is the basis of that classification? The tier 1 power stations, first is that the capacity or installed capacity per unit is far greater than all the other units in the fleet of Eskom. The second one is that they are the newest of the power stations in the country. The third one is that they've got significant technology advances, and they are highly automated. And as a result, the ratio of units per employee is lower in these units compared to the much older units. And the fourth key feature of these tier 1 stations is that they are confronted with significant amount of emissions level when they got the permission to construct these power stations. I think the burden on reducing emissions has been overwhelming in comparison to the other stations. So that's the tier 1 station. Who are those tier 1 stations? The tier 1 stations is Kusile and Medupi. And jointly these tier 1 stations, they give us about 9,600 megawatts. Just to put that into context, so if you have installed a capacity of about 52,000 megawatts. So this is just shy of 20% of the installed capacity of Eskom is sitting with these two power stations. So if you were to use another reference, essentially these two stations are too big to fail, because you are going to see their impact on the energy availability factor across Eskom, but you are also going to see their impact on the stages or the levels of load shedding if these two stations fail. So let me go into Medupi now. Remember, I made tier 1, I said they give you approximately about 9,600 megawatts. So what do we know about Medupi? We know that Medupi has been commissioned over a period of time. There's about 6 units there in Medupi. The first unit was commissioned in 2015, and the last unit was commissioned in 2021. So in terms of power station, this is exceptionally very, very young. The first of the units, as I speak to you, is about 8 years old. And generally, on average, the design life of these power stations is about 50 years of life. So that's the design life of these stations. And I just said the first unit of Medupi commissioned in 2015. So it's almost about 8 years old. So we know that Medupi, once when it's firing, it's got an installed capacity of 4,764 megawatts. So the units are operating, barring one unit, which is Unit 4. And this Unit 4 had failed. I think there was a fire in August of 2021. And what is regrettable is that this unit is yet to come back. And it's something that I'll speak to much later in relation to our outage planning, issues around outage slips, and I'll explain what the technical definitions are on that. Just make sure that I carry everyone with me in my presentation on what are the transversal issues with regards to planning. And these are issues that requires urgent attention, because they can help us to improve the performance of these units going into the future. And Medupi, as I speak to you, its energy availability factor, essentially the efficiency of the operation of the 5 units that are in operation. I just said that Unit 4 is out, is about 70%. And what are the issues that we have picked up in Medupi? These are not necessarily exhaustive, but these are issues that requires attention. The first one is that is what they refer to as a premature failure of units. I just told you that the oldest of the units there is 8 years old, and the youngest of those units there is about 2 years old. And yet you are experiencing failures. And when we're speaking to management, a significant proportion of this can be attributed to the issues that are well documented in the Zondo Commission around the corruption, just the cutting of corners. And the second feature of what they're experiencing there is that there's a wide use of wrong material. So as the unit goes out of operation, as they are trying to fix it, they determine that these are, if you like, these are parts that are wrong, or these are not original parts. And of course, it talks to about cutting corners and people lining up their pockets, so to speak. But we know, as I speak to you now, that there are people who have been brought before the courts, and there's a judicial process that is unfolding. So what I'm saying is that we are paying the penalty, if you like, for those misdemeanors. Of course, the courts must still make that determination without preempting anything that is before the courts. And it's something that requires our attention. For a station that is this young to experience what we call unplanned capability load factor, essentially the failure rate of these units is sitting at about 24%. So if you like, 24% of the time these units are out, and we are unable to extract, if you like, the maximum amount of electrons that is required to help us to power the South African economy going into the future. And then the third issue, which is also transversal, that will require attention, is the speed of procurement for new parts or replacement parts inside Eskom. Like I said, it manifests itself also in Medupi. It's something that requires attention, and we'll suggest to you how we propose to address that going into the future as a recommendation. So we can't impose on Eskom, but of course it's a point that we'll raise in in cabinet. So what is the aggregate message that I'm sharing with you? The aggregate message I'm sharing with you at Midupi is that the interventions that are required there have little to do with whether we have declared a state of disaster or not. But the interventions that are required there are at a management level and also at a technical level. And let me also state that the failure of Unit 4 has nothing to do with the quality of the parts or the issues around design. It was about the procedural missteps on our part, and management has shared with us that the attention is given to that. The second station is Kusile in that Tier 1 stations. Kusile is got an installed, or if you like, at completion, is supposed to give us 4,600 megawatts. So we know that the first units were commissioned in 2017, and we are still in the process of commissioning other units. I think it's unit number 4 and unit number 6. Unit number 1, 2, 3 have been commissioned, and also unit number 5. And what do we know about Kusile is that there is the energy availability factor of the units that have been installed. I'm not talking about the units that have not been installed, because when you do a computation of the energy availability factor, it's on the units that have been commissioned, rather, that's the word to use, is at 37.4%. We know that of those 4 units, 3 of them are out, unit 1, 2, and 3. And why is that those units are out is because there was a significant failures in relation to what we've called the flue gas desulfurization component. I did say to you that these 2 power stations, Mudupi and Kusile, they've got a responsibility to reduce emissions level compared to the older power generations and power stations rather, and they've introduced a technology called FGD, flue gas desulfurization. Essentially, it's a chemical process that reduces the amount of sulfur in your emissions before you release it into the chimney and therefore into the atmosphere. And as a result of the failure of that chemical process, there was slurry that stacked on the chimney, and the weight of the slurry went into thousands of kilograms, which undermined the structural integrity of the chimney, and as a result they had to discontinue those 3 units. And then as a measure to ensure that we get these 3 units up and running without necessarily fully meeting, if you like, the emissions parameters, ESCOM made an application to the Minister of Environment, Fisheries and Forestry to say that we ask for an exemption from those emissions level, so that it allows us these units as speedily as possible, but we still do commit to ensuring that we go back to meeting the emissions level over a period of time. And Minister Chrissy did grant ESCOM that exemption. And I have to emphasize that exemption was granted outside the provisions of the state of disaster. This is the powers that rest with the Minister of Environment, Fisheries and Forestry within the existing parameters of legislation. So what is the promise we are giving to the South African people is that Unit 3 is going to be returned on the 28th of November. Unit 1 will come back on the 11th of December. Unit 2 is projected to come back on the 24th of December this year. So essentially we'll be returning those 3 units back into operations. And by the 24th of December, we'll have an additional 2,160 megawatts on the system. So essentially, you are reducing, if you like, load shedding by 2 stages. So we're improving the performance of the grid. And then in the long term, what is it that we are doing? Of course, by February of next year, another unit will be commissioned. So I'm talking about the 3 units that have been out. The other units will be commissioned February of next year. The other unit is coming on stream. It's another 700 megawatts that will come on stream. So between now and February, if you like, there's 2,800 megawatts, just shy of 3 stages of load shedding, which will come on stream. What will it require in the long term for us to address the challenges at Kusile on the FDGs? So the team is working very hard, a team of competent men and women, young engineers
led by Mr. Bonga Mashazi, they have been able to diagnose the problem. So they are doing significant design modification to the flue gas desulfurization so that we don't encounter the same problem that we have encountered. So that completes, if you like, tier one stations. Now I'm going to tier 2 stations. Tier 2 stations are significant in that essentially is the bulk of our generation capacity put together. They are a little bit older compared to Kusile and Midupi, but they are key to the sustenance, if you like, of energy generation in the country, and by extension our ability to resolve load shedding. I'm starting, the first one is Kendal. Kendal, the first unit was commissioned in 1988, and the last unit was commissioned in 1992. So Kendal is meant to give us about the installed capacity is 4,116 megawatts, and the energy availability factor, as I speak to you now, is sitting at 46.75%. So you can see that of the 4,116 megawatts that is installed at Kendal, they are giving us less than 2,000 megawatts. And why is that the case? So the first one is that Kendal has got major problems with regards to the ability to remain within the parameters of the approved emissions. So Unit 1, we are losing about 200 megawatt as a result of load losses. So what that means is because they're having great difficulty in meeting their emissions level, they have to slow down the car, which is your generations at the various units. So Unit 1, for an example, they have to slow down the car by about 200 megawatts. Unit 2, they have to slow down the car by about 100 megawatts. Unit 3, they have to slow down the car by about 300 megawatts. So we can get an additional 1,000 megawatts at Kendal by ensuring that we address the issues of emissions. And there's a need for us to invest in the technology that can help us to ensure that we run these units without necessarily having to slow them down and without undermining our licensing requirements from an emissions point of view. So here there are options that can be taken. So the first option is that continue as is. So essentially lose 1,000 megawatts at Kendal. So it's an additional stage of load shedding and preserve the environment, ensure that we protect posterity, we remain within the confines of the law. The second option is to say that no, we are going to run these units at full capacity, and then you are in breach of the law, but you are able to save us 1,000, and we are able to add another 1,000 megawatts to the grid, and then you are able to lower the stages of load shedding by one stage. The third option that is that you can do both. How do you do both? That in the short term apply to the authority that has the prerogative of determining, if you like, exemptions, to say I need an exemption for this period, but I'm committing that in this period I'm going to take the following actions. One, to mitigate the risk in relation to emissions level, but ultimately ensure that I remain within the parameters of the new emissions level, so that one, I don't destroy the environment, but two, I do continue to sweat this asset and give the additional 1,000 megawatts that is needed. So you have three options. As is, then the economy suffers, 1,000 megawatts is locked as a result of our inability to run the car at its maximum capacity. The second one, run it at the maximum capacity, save the economy, you are doing great harm to the environment. Unit option 3, do both. In the short term, accept that there's going to be harm to the environment, commit to a program to ensure that I'm going to retrofit technology to ensure that I remain within the parameters, but at the same time, I'm saving the environment. There are pros and cons to all of those. I'm just presenting to the country that those are the three options that are before us, and we'll present to Cabinet what our preferred option is, and Cabinet will make a determination. So it's not for us to make that determination, but the authority, independent of what Cabinet nation, because the authority is not influenced by us. that are before, the facts that are before the authority before making that determination. So I'm not preempting what the outcomes or the decision of the authority will be, but essentially it's about what these options are. Go for an option, and there's a respect for the law. 2 is that we want to ensure that we save the economy, and 3, to show that in the long term we are going to remain within the parameters of what is the emissions level. And then station number 4 is Matimba. This is one of our best performing stations. The energy availability factor is sitting at 75%. Of course, the target is to go beyond that. They have illustrated in one of the units they had reached previously over 80% of energy availability factor. That is important for station managers to have that appreciation. That it's possible for them to reach that 80% energy availability factor. Of course, it's giving us 3,990 megawatts. The first unit was commissioned in 1987, and the last unit was commissioned in 1991. So what are the 2 big problems they are experiencing there? The first one is in the delays in the procurement in relation to getting parts that are required to fix the units and get the units back into operation. And this brings me back to that question I raised earlier on, what I call outage slips. So what that means is that this unit, I'm going to need it for about 4 days. I'm going to fix it in that 4 days and put it back in a better condition, and therefore we're able to extract as much megawatts as possible. But when you're experiencing outage slip, that means although you have set yourself a target that I'm returning this unit in 4 days, you find that you're returning it in 5 days or even a month later than what you had planned. What are some of the causes of that? Is that sometimes when they take these units out, the parts are not available. So it's a planning issue. So this has nothing to do with the declaration of state of disaster. It has to do with a planning issue. But the next question that has to be asked is that planning also is undermined by procurement, because one of the things they have to do, they've got their supplier database, they go out to suppliers, this is the preferred supplier because of the price, the supplier then goes to the original equipment manufacturer, you find that the equipment is expensive, the supplier that has been chosen doesn't have the necessary liquidity to purchase that, doesn't have the guarantees to give to the original equipment manufacturer, he or she had promised I'll bring the parts within 3 days, after 3 days he or she is not able to raise the kind of money that is required to procure that supply component and give it to ESCOM, to Matimba in this instance, and therefore that process has failed. They must restart the process again, and that extends and extends and extends until plant managers are losing, if you like, time, and they are not able to return these parts back, the components back into operation. And we are making that determination. There are transversal issues. This is one of those that is found almost across ESCOM. So one of the solutions that you can make, of course, when you give opportunity to suppliers, it's about broadening the cake, making sure that the opportunities are available to everyone. But there's a cost to the economy. So if you are unable to meet your obligations within that time frame, we are not getting the megawatts that we need for us to power the South African economy. So that's the option. You can proceed that, but accept that there's a casualty, and that casualty is the South African economy. The second option is to say, in this period of crisis, because our priority is to save jobs, make sure that farmers produce, retailers don't have to carry inordinate amount of operational costs, make sure that small businesses are operating by ensuring that we provide a reliable energy supply. So in this short period, you could say that, no, we're doing away with the need for you to go to individual suppliers. Just go direct to the original equipment manufacturer. And in this way, we're able to fix quick. We get the economy going. Once we have established stability, there's additional or excess capacity, then you go back to the supply. So those are the choices that sits before us. So you can see, this has nothing to do with the declaration of state of disaster. It's about the ability to plan, and just foregoing, if you like, this kind of arrangement, accepting that we are faced with a crisis, we need to address this crisis. Again, in Matimba, the issue we have there is around the issue of the quality of coal. So this is not the coal that is being tracked from outside. That has to do with the so-called cartels in the trucking industry and poor coal. Has to do with our inability to ensure that we invest in the mines that are bringing us coal. Some of these coal mines are what we call coal cost-plus mines. So what that means is that Eskom has got an obligation to invest in that coal mine to get the kind of quality coal that they want. And you'll find that also when you go to Tuka, when you go to Letabo. That's a problem that's there. We are not investing in that coal mine. So we can't be blaming the miner. The miner mines where you said he must mine, and of course you are going to reach levels where you have mined out good quality coal that gives you the right calorific value and therefore a better burn rate, and therefore you are getting greater levels of efficiency. But once you get to poor coal, although it still remains within the design parameters, accept that you are going to compromise on the efficiency of the plant, and therefore Eskom needs to invest in there. And we know that the ability of Eskom to invest, its constraints on its balance sheet are well documented. So those are choices that must be made, if you like, to make sure that we improve this performance at Matimba. They go beyond 75%, they go close to 80%. And then the next station is Majuba. Again, Majuba, first unit commissioned in 1996. The last unit was commissioned in 2001. The energy availability factor again is 47.95%. So you can see that we are not achieving the kind of efficiency that we want, and it requires our collective, if you like, management to ensure that they address this question. What are the preeminent questions there is the issues around the milling plant, not operating at the right level. So there has to be significant amount of investment there. So you can see investment in the coal plus mine, investment in some of these milling plants requires that there has to be capital expenditure on the part of Eskom. And I did make the point that the constraints on Eskom balance sheet are known and they are documented. So we need to make those choices. Is it about saying that the Eskom balance sheet can't carry this investment, and yet we know the cost to the South African economy as a result of unmet demand, or there has to be a rethink of how you finance this capital requirements? We'll make our submissions to cabinet on what is possible, because we think that you need to think outside the Eskom balance sheet. You need to think about the broader implications on the South African economy. So the preoccupation can't just be Eskom balance sheet. The preoccupation must be what is the cost to the South African economy. And we know, some have written extensively, that the cost of unserviced energy is about 500 billion rands to the South African economy. The Reserve Bank projects that growth will be about 0.2%. That's barely growth, if you were to ask me. We know the cost to employment. We know the cost to various industries that are major employers in this country. The agricultural sector, we met the other day with the OEM in the automotive sector. They are beginning to share with us some of the options that are confronting them. So the conversation there is about whether there's a possibility of providing additional fiscal support to make these investments so that we save the South African economy. Of course, when you provide that fiscal support, it means that your debt to GDP or your budget deficit is likely going to grow. Of course, that's not our domain, it's a domain of national treasury. But we are able to show you the other side, that the Commissioner of the Reserve Bank of SARS would have given us even much more spectacular results than the kind of results that he has achieved, which are exceptional. And he has told us that load shedding has reduced, if you like, the ability for us to collect additional revenue by, I think, close to about 60 billion rands or so. I think that's the number that he raised. So that's the cost to the South African economy. So these are difficult and hard choices. But we know from Majuba, when we sat with them expressed our displeasure that we can't be operating at 47.95%, which is still lower than the average of the installed fleet of Eskom. And they've shared with us interventions that they'll be making. And as a result of those interventions, they should be able to give us an additional 1,880 megawatts going into the future. So that's the story of Majuba. Then I'm taking you to Letabo. Letabo here in the Sasolburg, the energy availability factor is 73.81%. Again, one of our best performers. The installed capacity is 3,708 megawatts. And then there's issues again of the quality of coal. So the quality of coal has little to do with the miner, has everything to do with Eskom's inability to reinvest in that mine, because it's a cost-plus mine. So we bear the responsibility of investing in that mine. And the miner has said that I have good quality, good deposits of coal that can meet the kind of calorific value that you want, so that we push up the energy availability factor. But because of those constraints at Eskom with regards to their balance sheet, they are unable to make new capital investment in these coal plus mines. And then the net result is that the economy suffers, because we are not able to lift further the energy availability factor, which is something that requires our attention. Again, Majuba and Letabo, nothing to do with the declaration of state of disaster, but the constraints on the Eskom balance sheet. We are raising a different question, that the conversation should not be about the constraint on the Eskom balance sheet and therefore its inability to make this capital investment. The conversation is, what is the cost to the South African economy as a result of our failure to make that investment? And then rethink of how you can solution the best way to make investment and extract maximum value out of these units, so that we get to power the South African economy. Like I said when I started, it is about the South Africa and her people, and by extension the economy. That's our conversation, and our conversation is not restricted to Eskom. But Eskom is indispensable to the resolution of the generation problem in our country because of their dominance in that space. They have been a monopoly, and hitherto, henceforth, we know that we are introducing additional generation capacity. But they are a dominant player, and therefore they are indispensable. They must help us to carry the country to resolve this problem. And then I'm taking you to Tutuka. So we know in Tutuka that this first unit 1985, the last unit 1990 to be decommissioned. It's important so that you have an appreciation of age. You can see on Letabo that it's about 1985. You can see it's about close to 38 years of age, Letabo. But it's still giving us 73.81%. What is the message there? There is no correlation between the energy availability factor and age. It's important that we dispel that myth. When I started earlier on, I was able to show you that one of our youngest stations, Kusile, the energy availability factor is at 37.1. You can argue that technical issues, but I'm trying to illustrate to you that there is no relationship between age and the performance of the plant. So we must dismiss that and say that it's a function of our ability to maintain, plan maintenance, investment in the coal quality. And I've made the point around how we could, some of the efforts we could be making in the cost plus mines. And then Tutuka, like I said, 1985 to 1990, its installed capacity is 36,654 megawatts. One of our West performers is performing at 26.02%. So the best opportunity for us to eliminate a stage or two of load shedding doesn't sit with Letabo, because it's already up there. There's so much that you can extract out of Letabo. I think that's much. There's so much you can extract out of Medupi. Of course, their unit, the one unit that is out is 700 megawatts. So it's about 3 times the size of the units, average size of the units at some of the smaller power stations like Anot. But you can see that the best opportunity for us is to, amongst others, is to address these problems at Tutuka. What are those problems at Tutuka? So they say unit 1, unit 2, unit 3, they are old, and there are issues around design flaws. And then when you go to the other units 4, 5, and 6, they've refurbished those, and they are able to extract if you like, maximum, of course, within operating condition. They are able to extract maximum efficiency. So the point they are simply making is that if we were to reinvest in the same manner that we reinvested in Unit 4, 5, and 6, we are likely going to get an exceptional amount of additional megawatts out of Unit 1, 2, and 3. Why are those investments not made? Again, is the constraint on the ESCOM balance sheet. And I'll keep on going back to this conversation. The conversation must be beyond what is the challenges on ESCOM balance sheet, but what is in the best interest of the country. And therefore, we might need additional capital to ensure that we are able to refurbish these units and extract as much as it is possible going into the future. I mean, for example, Unit 3, one of the 3 older units, has been out since the 16th of December. And when we visited there just about last week, that unit was still out. Again, because they are unable to detect what is the root cause. And they say they can't make that determination because the unit is old. But on much newer units, they are able to easily determine the root cause, address the unit root cause, and return the unit back into operation. And that's something that requires attention. And something that is hanging in the air in Tutuga is the fact that it's meant to be decommissioned by 2030. So essentially, in the next 7 years, the system is going to lose 3,654 of installed megawatts. When in fact I'm standing before you, I'm saying that the country is short of 6,000 megawatts just to break even. When I say break even, just to get the economy going. But we know that for additional growth of the South African economy, you need additional capacity to be on stream. And yet there's plans that in the short term we must be decommissioning this. So the math doesn't add up. You can't be looking for additional megawatts when there are projections to take out other megawatts. What it does, it plunges the country into darkness, literally, and undermine the ability for us to achieve our developmental goal. So that's one of the transversal issues. You will see it plays itself in other power stations that are likely going to be decommissioned in the midst of the crisis that is confronting us. So that's a decision that the cabinet must make. You can make that determination that they've reached their design life, let's decommission them. They are very expensive to operate, but it comes at great cost to the South African economy. So you just do a bit of modeling. What is it that the economy can absorb? Where I'm standing, it's about jobs, it's about growth, it's about expansion of opportunities, making everything possible that we keep on improving generation capacity going into the future. Again, Tutuga is supplied by a cost-plus mine. Quality of coal has nothing to do with the mine, I must emphasize. Has everything to do with our ability or inability to invest in the mine to ensure that we go into areas, have shafts that we are going to get good quality coal of the right calorific value, improve the burn rate, has got implications on both the efficiency and the quality of the emissions. So that's a calculus that should be before us at all times to ensure that we are able to address this question going into the future. As a result of Tutuga being decommissioned in the next 7 years or so, they are losing a lot of experienced engineers. So there's no appetite. One of the things that I picked up when I went to the ESCOM power station is the absolute lack of morale. I mean, people are despondent. They don't see the future there. When in fact the country and ESCOM has invested a lot in them, but we are about to lose them as a result of what is apparent, what is lying ahead. And then as I move gallop towards the end, it's Mantla. Mantla, first unit, 1979, and then the last unit, 1983, 3,600 megawatts of installed capacity. The EAF, 53.75%, just averaging out. Of course, they've got a target that they can ramp it up to 65%. And we said that we must be aggressive, but still be realistic about what will constitute the target. Because it's important when we communicate to the country on what these targets are. We are confident about our ability to meet those targets. It's one thing to proclaim a target, it's quite another to achieve a target. But don't also understate your ability to achieve certain targets. It's important that we remain realistic and yet ambitious. We can do those simultaneously. And then there's also on Mata, we are losing megawatts as a result of the quality of coal. They've computed what that is, and I'm going to aggregate what is it that we can, the amount of additional megawatts that can come on stream as a result of us just improving on the quality of coal. And I did say that on the cost plus mines has nothing to do with the miner, has everything to do with our ability to ensure that we are able to address the investments that is required to get the kind of quality coal that we want. And then the next, number 9 is Krill, 1976 to 1979, installed capacity 3,000 megawatts, the EAF 49.64%, dipping below the average of 53, dipping below 50%, although their targets will be the average target at 53. You can see there's a significant opportunity there. There's 1,500 megawatts that we are not getting as a result of our inability first to address the issue of that have to do with the cooling towers. So what they are saying there is that 90% of their partial load losses. A partial load loss means that the machine is running, the unit is running, but instead of running at 600 megawatts, it's running at 400 megawatts. That's all that I'm saying. So those are the partial, and others are unplanned when you take out the unit as a result of trips. And partial load losses, 90% of that is as a result of our underinvestment in the cooling towers. Again, we can recover this, has nothing to do with the declaration of state of disaster. It's about the investments that we must make into this asset to be able to extract all of this. Again, the conversation can't be restricted to the ESCOM's balance sheet. The conversation must be restricted, must be expanded to what is in the best interest of the sovereign. That indeed there are going to be these investments that we can make with all its implications. If you were to borrow debt to GDP, and of course that's the cost you are going to pay, or if you like the budget deficit, but over a period of time you are able to recover the South African economy, you are improving the collections in your National Revenue Fund, you are able to defray those capital costs, and you get the economy of the country going. Of course, in Krill they say, as a result of these partial load losses, per day they are losing 960 megawatts. So we can recover a stage of load shedding by making those interventions. And all we are saying, compute what is the cost to the South African economy of one stage of load shedding. We will arrive at that number. And you see that that number can justify us making these investments going into the future. And then the next number 10 is Duva. 3,000 megawatts is giving us 40.34%. So essentially when you go to Duva, there's 60% that there's 1,800 megawatts of installed capacity that the country is not benefiting from. So those are the interventions that must be made. The one thing that must be said about Duva, they were able to illustrate to us that as a result of the interventions, they put a dedicated team, 3 teams working on trying to improve performance per unit. And I guess that's a template that you can export to other units, to other power stations. A dedicated team that is focused just on the unit. And as a result of that, they were able to add another 1,020 megawatts. It's about planning, it's about understanding the nature of the problem, and that's how we are going to address this situation going forward. Now I've left the tier 2, I'm going to the tier 3. So these are the old ladies of the power stations. They are older than a lot of you in this room. These are fellows that have been pushing for many years, over 50 years of being in operation. If you go to the tier 3, Arnold, for an example, 2,220 megawatts. These are much older. The units were giving you about 200 megawatts per unit. The tier 2 that I was sharing with you, per unit, they were giving you about 600 megawatts per unit. The tier 1, they are giving you anything between 700 and 800 megawatts per unit. That's Kusile and Midupi. So what do we know about Arnold? We know that there's a unit 2 and 3 will be decommissioned by 2026. So I'm sitting here before you. I'm saying we are looking for megawatts, but then there's a plan to remove these 2 units, about 400 megawatts, in the next 3 years, out of commission. So I'm just saying the conversation must happen. What is that conversation? We know that you can extend the life of these units so that you protect the South African economy. Of course, you'll raise other issues around emissions, making sure that you get the technology to help you to remain within those parameters. And technology is not expensive. It's not inexpensive, it's very expensive. I mean, if you go to the FGD, the flue gas desulfurization unit, that helps us to reduce the amount of sulfur content that is in Kusile and is also meant to be rolled out in Medupi. It's 40 billion rands per unit. That's what you require. But if you are to use that technology, these old power stations are not designed from a technical point of view to accommodate that component. And therefore it means that your FGD is not your solution for those units. You must look for other solutions to ensure that you reduce the amount of sulfur and the amount of emissions. So that's why Arnold is operating at 50.4%. And then you go to Hendrina, 1970, the first unit, 1976, the other unit is operating at 23.3%. It has 10 units that we're giving you 200 megawatts per unit. 4 units, as I speak to you, are out of operation. So we are short of 600 megawatts. 4 units are out of operation. Of course, when you advance the case to say, but why can't we get these units going? I suspect the answer will be that is the cost of getting those units up and running. And I'm saying have a different conversation. And that first argument is that the balance sheet can't afford it. I'm saying but expand the possibility of what we can do in this plans. Ask the question, what is the cost of not having 800 megawatts into the South African economy? And that is just shy of one stage of load shedding. And I think that is going to reconfigure the conversation. And the point we are raising there is that even if it's not about the ESCOM balance sheet, ask what private sector can do without relinquishing ownership of those assets. And that's what we are presenting. The market can tell you that, of course, these units, you have decommissioned them. We can go in there, we can refurbish, use the latest technology, operate them, extend their design life. Of course, without necessarily owning them, we operate, we'll transfer. It still becomes the ESCOM asset, or if you like, the asset of the people of the country. So I'm not talking about privatizing that. No, we're not far from that. It's about using market opportunities to ensure that in the shortest possible space of time, we are able to address these challenges going into the future. And then there's issues of Grootvrij. Grootvrij still has that problem. These are older units that requires attention. Again, I think there's about 3 units there that are out of commission. And again, 200 megawatts per unit. And those are the issues that requires attention. Can we afford to have such a situation? You go to Camden, again, one of the old ladies of the fleet, there's an intention, there's 3 units that must go out now, I think by June. The one was meant to go out when we were there, when we were visiting the plant. So we are taking out 600 megawatts, and I'm saying we are looking for 6,000 megawatts. So essentially we are taking out 10% of that which we are looking for. And you can see in Camden, it's still performing. I'm not talking about units that are not performing. In Camden, it's still performing. We can still extract a lot of value out of Camden, but it's something that we have chosen not to pay attention to. And it's meant to close down by 2025. So essentially in 2025, 2 years' time, or less than 2 years, the system is going to lose 1,561 megawatts. And the point we are simply making is that you have to rethink how you want to address these questions going forward. And then there's Quebec, as I conclude. Quebec is about 1976. The first unit is 2 units at Quebec. That gives us 960 megawatts. The 1 unit has been in operation since 1984. That's unit 1, which is currently out. And of course, they've missed their own, what I call outtake sleep. So they are out by 40 days. They were meant to come back, I think, end of June, July. Now they are extending it to sometime in August. So it simply means that the system, at the time when we need this energy the most, we know that the coldest period of winter comes the other side of May. When we thought we'll retain it, this system will be, this unit will not be back on stream. And it's something that requires our attention. And then immediately after that, 2 months after that, Unit 2 must go out as part of our licensing conditions. As I conclude, I want to indicate that as a result of the underperformance of this base load, we are putting an inordinate amount of pressure on our peaking plants. So we are running these open cycle gas turbines like nobody's business. These things are meant to be on load about 4% of the time. That's when you call on them to say, come and help us, we are in trouble. Just 4% of the time. But now as I speak to you, we need them 11.5% of the time. And that means that we are consuming a lot of diesel. We know that between the period of 2014 and 2017, in fact, the situation was worse. How we stave off load shedding was we were burning diesel. It was sitting at about 21.5% during those periods on average, 2013 to 2017. Now we are sitting at 11.5%. If these base loads, these stations that I shared with you, continue to underperform, it means we must run these peaking plants, the open cycle generators. So let me just give you a sense. When you burn this fuel, this diesel, per hour, you consume about 45,000 liters. That's how much you are consuming. So the more you consume, and it's 2 of these units that you need at Ankerleg. So essentially it's 90,000 liters of diesel per hour. So that's the cost to the South African economy. No, that's the cost to the fiscus. And then the next conversation is, if we are unable to get the kind of base load that helps us to close this gap on the demand side, we have to run this plant. I'm saying they come at great cost. You must answer a different question. There is a question to the fiscus, the actual amount that you use to buy the diesel. And then there's a cost of not running them to the South African economy. It means that you could be at higher stages of load shedding. These are difficult choices that are confronting us. We are going to cabinet and presenting before cabinet what we think is the best solution to our problems here. As I conclude, I want to tell you about the transversal issues. There's people issues there at ESCOM. People issues, nothing to do with the leadership, by the way. People issues to do with, if you like, job security. I told you that Camden is closing. There are a number of stations that are closing. Grootfontein, the units are gone. And not the units are going. That's people attached to that. And there is no additional incentive for people to apply themselves. The best that you need to run these plants don't see their future at ESCOM. And I'm just saying it's a conversation you must have. And as we say, we discontinue this unit, it's important to say to us, where is that additional generation capacity that can meet this base load megawatt per megawatt? It's one thing to have to be on an accelerated path of decarbonization. And by the way, renewables is the future. You can see the aggregate share of the energy mix is growing exponentially. But we are sitting with a crisis now that is undermining energy sovereignty of this country. People are out of jobs. The economy is on its knees. Businesses are closing. Farmers can't produce. They're passing on that cost to the end consumer. The poor are disproportionately affected. There are very difficult choices that are before us, and we are helping to make that determination on what should continue to be, what should be the case going forward. And one of those choices is, do you close at the current rate, undermine the ability of the economy to recover, exacerbate the load shedding problem, or you delay, refurbish, there's capital cost associated with that, the South African economy stands up, it's able to run on its own. You create opportunity for us to take units out for plant maintenance and secure the future of this country and posterity. I think that's the situation that is confronting us. And then there are also design issues. Attend to the issues of outage slip. So essentially, you say, I'll return this unit by this date, you fail to return. Yesterday, the total amount of megawatts that were absent from the grid was 1,900 as a result of outage slips. So when management says, I will return this unit by this date, and it doesn't come back, there's 1,900 megawatts just the other day, I think it's 2 days ago, which we could not get as a result of outage slips. That's not a state of disaster, it's a planning issue. And by extension, it's a procurement issue. It is that dispensation of saying, let's go straight to the original equipment manufacturer. Then we are able to reduce the stages of load shedding. Get the economy going, we'll be able to expand opportunities to everyone. The other one that I kept on repeating is about investments into these assets to address emissions, so that we invest in those coal plus mines, because on contract we can determine what is the quality of coal that we want. On the cost plus, we have to make those investments. It's a capital cost. You will argue that the ESCOM balance sheet can't carry. I'm saying answer a different question. Can the South African economy afford that? And the answer is an emphatic no. And that's a balancing act that needs to happen. So in conclusion, we know that Kusile will give us 2,100 megawatts projected by the 24th of December. We know that if we address the Kendall issues of emissions, I've shared with you what the options are, and I didn't tell you what is our preferred option, which we'll present to Cabinet. It's about 1,000 megawatts. We know that as a result of improvements in the coal quality, investing in those mines, not necessarily about the miners. Of course, it comes at cost to the fiscal, it comes at cost to the ESCOM balance sheet, but the returns are greater to the South African economy. We can get about an additional 1,200 megawatts. And then just on the cooling towers, as Krill was raising and others, there's another 900 megawatts. So if you like, it's 2,100, is 1,000, is 3,100. Is another 1,200, is 4,300. It's another 300, is 4,600. It's another 900, it's about 5,400 of these megawatts that are locked there. And once we address the issues of slips, returning the units as planned, and outage planning is thorough, then we're talking, like I said just the other day, was 1,900 megawatts. So suddenly you could be out of load shedding. But unfortunately, it's not that easy. It is those choices that must be made. And we'll present that to Cabinet and come back to the country and say this is what is possible. You will see that in this submission. I've not said anything about additional generation from the renewable energy complex, because we'll be engaging with them. I'm giving you feedback on the fossil fuel and nuclear. I will come back and give you feedback on the renewables to say this is what is on stream, this is what is possible, these are the number of projects that are on stream, these are the number of electrons that can be evacuated. By that I mean, as a result of the weaknesses or the capacity of the grid, we are unable to evacuate the electrons. The renewable energy complex in this country is in the Northern Cape, but the grid capacity is in Mpumalanga, coming to the center and to the south for obvious reasons, because mines are constructed, power stations are constructed at the mouth of these mines, closer to source, so closer to feedstock. But your renewable energy complex is in the Northern Cape, and then it's take or pay. Whether ESCOM is using these electrons or not, they must pay. And that's why it's got implications on their tariff structure. Because they are paying and yet we don't get this benefit. Or in some instances, they must slow down what the units can produce, their own units, because we must accommodate some of these renewables. So it's important that there has to be investment in the grid, and that's a conversation. We'll come back to you so that we take you step by step, and there's an appreciation of what is possible going into the future. And as I conclude, like I do all the time, I'm more than confident that we've got both the capacity, the will, and the expertise to resolve this load shedding. I'm more than confident. And I'm sure that once I go to Cabinet and map up what these options are, we should be able to say to you that these are the timelines that it takes. Of course, on others, the timelines are known. They are public on what Kusile can do. On the issues of emissions, a function of whether you go this option, that option, if you choose the option of exemptions, but committing to mitigating and over a period to addressing those emission levels is another 1,000 megawatts. The issues around investments in the quality of coals at the mine so that we assist the miners to get us the right quality of coal, right calorific value, burn rate, and therefore the efficiency of the plant and the reduction of the emission. It's possible if we make those investments. And then the issues around ensuring that we keep up the morale, essentially extending the life of these plants, giving us a scope and play for us to be able to get the 6,000 megawatts and not be on an aggressive, accelerated path of decarbonization, but still committing to the decarbonization journey. It's a conversation that only Cabinet can have, and make that determination is not mine, and I don't want to preempt it. So I'll conclude then. My apologies for being long. I thought that it's important that it's not a traditional press conference. It's just to take everyone through on what these issues are so that there's a common appreciation of what this means. And you have seen in everything that I've shared with you, there is nothing that is reliant on the declaration of state of disaster. That you go to direct to the original equipment manufacturer, you invoke the provisions of the PFMA, could be either emergency agency or sole provider, whichever one is appropriate. You making investments in those cooling towers, refurbishing some of these plants, has nothing to do with the state of disaster. You returning units at the time that you committed to what I call outage state slips has nothing to do with issues of state of disaster. It's got everything to do with planning. And that's the point that we're making. Thank you very much. We'll take the questions.
Thank you very much, Minister. Colleagues, I'll take questions. If you could please just introduce yourself in the media house, just for our noting before you ask your question. I'll start this side, you'll be first, second, Heidi third. You'll be fourth. Thanks.
Minister, it's Nayed Zonetonje from Eyewitness News. As you mentioned in your conclusion, this is not a traditional press briefing, and it was very technical. But I wanted to just ask if you could simplify this for the normal person out there on the street. What are the problems, or the top 3, top 5 problems that you've identified? And what are the possible solutions, without getting too technical, just so that our viewers and our listeners will be able to understand them? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Hello, Minister. Thank you for that very detailed briefing on all the different power stations. You are focusing, at least here, on maintaining and improving the performance of these power stations. Well, actually, for the last 3 years, we've heard a lot about that from the previous CEO of ESCOM and so forth. And what we kept also hearing was that additional generational capacity is needed in order to have the space to do the kind of maintenance that needed to happen for, to improve the EAF. And that additional generation capacity hasn't been there. I mean, you haven't talked about additional capacity from elsewhere. And I just wondered how you think all of this is going to be possible without it. And then coming back to money, and yeah, the ESCOM balance sheet is one thing, but the government also has a balance sheet, which is a bit tight. And if we go the route of focusing on coal, extending the life of coal plants, rather than decommissioning them according to the schedule, not more aggressively, it's the $8.5 billion that was promised to South Africa to help it transition away from coal and perhaps be used to strengthen the grid will not be there. And I just wondered, how that factors into the equation. And then my last question, during the budget, the Treasury talked about, the Finance Minister talked about a plan to concession out the coal plants to improve the EAF. And there is a report from an international consortium which is due in June. Where are we with this? you know, is that still on the table? Is that part of your framework here? And sorry, just one more. When are you going to be presenting your options to Cabinet? Thank you.
You didn't give us your name in media.
Sorry, it's Mariam Issa, and I'm with EE Business Intelligence.
Heidi.
Heidi Chakos from ENCA. I just want to ask Minister, with all the issues that you've raised, what does the forecast look like for winter? You said that you would tell us, so I'm just wondering what that looks like. And then I have this question, Minister, please ask the Minister if this authority has been fully defined. President said in Isona that the authority of the Electricity Minister would be set up. So what authority does he have compared to Minister Gwede and Minister Praveen as far as ESCOM and other energy matters are concerned? And then I just want to ask the question around the national state of disaster. Were there any decisions made under the national state of disaster to deal with the energy crisis? Any important decisions that were made? And if so, what does that mean because the national state of disaster has been terminated? Thank you.
Okay, last question. I'll take the second one.
All right. Good morning, Minister Katla Wandogodi here from the SABC. Mine is also on the national state of disaster. We saw the move to lift the national state of disaster, and you at length went on to say that most of the findings there at these power stations had nothing to do with the declaration of the national state of disaster. Then could we say that this announcement was rushed of us as a country going into a national state of disaster before taking into considerations all the groundwork that needs to be done to inform that move to declare the national state of disaster? Also, in line with what my colleague asked there around the fact that you are going to be approaching Cabinet here for some of these issues to be solidified. When are we seeing this happen? The temperatures are dropping, we're inching towards winter, and people are in need of some sort of a reprieve here. Are we expecting to see you, promptly approaching Cabinet here? And what would be your expectations in terms of some of the short-term and the long-term issues that you've noted down as the intervention methods that are needed there? And also just finally, on the deployment of the army at some of these facilities, we saw the President announcing that the armies would be deployed to some of these facilities. What are their findings? They've been stationed there. Have they actually given you some sort of feedback to say that this is what we are finding and this is what we've managed to really in any way mitigate since our deployment to some of these stations? Do we expect to see them also continuing in their mandate there, or these interventions really don't in any way accommodate them stationed at some of these power plants? Thank you.
Thanks. I think I'll take the last two. The Minister can answer overall. So I'll start with you.
Hi, Minister. My name is Tim Bedwell from Bloomberg News. Just in addition to the question from EE Intelligence on the capital refurbishments, sounding like you are going to require a lot of money. Obviously, that will be up to the finance minister to make the determination of where the money comes from. But do you have a figure in mind around about how much we would need to bring about the kind of progress that you would like to see? And then with the exemptions for the emissions, would that just be with regard to the cable power station, or are there others that would benefit from those kinds of exemptions? And maybe if you can elaborate further, do you have sort of timelines in mind for how long those exemptions would be for in order to maximize that benefit? And then finally, just in terms of the targets that have been set out in the Action Energy Plan, in your findings, have you identified any targets that might need to be amended? Maybe we can bring some forward, maybe some need to be extended longer, etc. Thank you.
Morning, Minister. This is Amanda Khoza from the Sunday Times. I just want to know, is the Minister saying that there was no need for a state of disaster to be declared?
Morning, Minister. It's Omar from KFM. Minister, investment in the quality calls increasing lifespan of some of the units, improving cooler towers or systems. do we have the budget, Minister? ESCOM cannot afford that. Where is the money going to come from? Thank you.
Okay, now thank you very much for those questions. Sonda, part of the difficulty of the conversation is very technical. And as an engineer, I've got a great affinity to numbers. But let me try and simplify it, because I think it's a justified request that just simplify it, man, to an ordinary person. Okay. I'm going to use the metaphor of a car. And I'm going to use an Audi. Choice of an Audi is because that's the car I drive. So the original manufacturer is Audi or VWs from that make. And then when I take the car, buy it the first time, they tell me that you must bring the car every 15,000 kilometers. You must bring the car in for checkup. It doesn't mean that the car is broken. So in engineering technical terms, we call that philosophy maintenance. It's just the philosophy of the design of the car. Because they're the original equipment manufacturer, they know what could go wrong with the car, what components wears off. Of course, it's a function of your driving behavior and other things. But they know on average that this is what we are expecting. So what I do is that I take this car. So think of my car as a power station, a unit at a power station. I drive it. And with the modern cars, it tells you that you are due for service in the next 2,000 kilometers. I get to that point, I go past that point. I make no effort to take the car in. And I get surprised 23,000 kilometers later, it has broken. So that's philosophy maintenance. So we have not been, in some instances, that has not been done. And of course, in some instances, in my car, because it's under motor plan, I don't have to pay for it. But in this instance, it could be that you have to pay for it when you have to take it in as part of that philosophy maintenance. And because I don't have that money, I choose not to. And when the car breaks down, it means that there's multiple components that are broken down. And that's when the unit gets to be taken out of operation. So that car is not there on the road, it's now in the garage. And then it reduces that unit, our performance of the power station, what we call the energy availability factor. So there's this car that is out of the 81 cars, because there are 81 units. Every power station, the power station has got anything from 6 to 10 units per station. So it brings it down. And as more cars goes out, it comes down and down. And half of the cars are out, and that's why you call 53%. And then the second one is that I know that I'm going to take this car. Now I'm fine. I know I'm going to stick by the rules. I'm going to take it in after 10,000, that 15,000 kilometers. And then because I know it, in this instance, I'm not talking to a workshop. When I take it there, I expect them to have the parts ready. That's why you take it in the morning, they look at it, because they know what needs to be fixed. The parts are already there. They are in the store, they get those. In some of the instances here, when the car goes out, the part is not there. Then they phone the original equipment, they say, we need this part. That church says, no, I've got so many orders, you have to wait. And that's what I call outage slips. You said you'll bring the car back in a day, and now it's taking 6 days. And the system is suffering. The third one has to do with, I take the car in, so that's the Minupi situation. When these chaps open the car, they find that, no man, I had gone somewhere, some corner street, I've replaced the pistons with some fake piston. And that's the one that is undermining the performance of the car. And that's the point I was making with regards to Kusile. Then you find that as they open this car, they find that parts that don't belong here. And as a result of that, it has undermined the efficiency of the performance of the car. And then the other one is that I choose not to take the car in because I just don't have the money. I don't have the money to take the car in. And let's assume that this was a minibus. It's an income generating, if you like, vehicle. I don't take it in
So if I don't take it in, then I lose my ability to make an income. And then I just decide to drive and drive and drive until the car comes to a point where it can't take it further. And then on the efficiency, when I buy my Audi, they tell me that it can do up to 120 kilometers an hour. But because I'm not maintaining it, the maximum I can do is about 53 kilometers an hour. So I'm losing out on the 47. Let's say they say maximum, just for simplicity, was 100 kilometers an hour. Now I'm at 53 kilometers an hour. When in fact I've promised people I'll be there in an hour because I assume that I'll be driving at this pace. And those people, that's how I did the South African economy. I said that, no, I'll be driving at 100 kilometers an hour, I'll be there on time, you'll be able to meet all their requirements, and suddenly I'm taking forever to come to meet the promise that I had made to the people. And that's the problem that is confronting us. So I mean, I've oversimplified a very complex problem, but essentially what are the top 4 issues? The first one is the underinvestment in this asset. Someone asked a legitimate question, and I keep on underscoring my comments by making that. You have a choice. That choice is that this entity called ESCOM, and we know its problems are well documented, has no money to invest in this capital cost. Now, when you accept that as a given and say there's nothing we can do as a country, then accept that you are going to go to higher stages of load shedding. Then accept that more people are going to lose jobs. Accept that farmers won't be able to produce. Accept that learners will going to have more number of drop calls. And then accept that the total cost to the South African economy continues to be exponential. Or say that let's take the hit as a South African. Accept that this is expensive, but we need to find money from somewhere. And it's not my space to say where money must come from. But I'm just saying we are faced with that stark choice. We have gotten us into this position. We must get ourselves out of this position. So protect the balance sheet, collapse the South African economy. Burden the balance sheet or additional fiscal support, it's got its own downside implications. Save the South African economy. Once it thrives, you are able to get your return backs. Protecting the employment, broadening the tax base, greater levels of investment, the economy grows, the National Revenue Fund grows, you are able to defray those upfront capital costs. That's the point that I'm making. And I'll present that, and Cabinet will make that determination. And yes, accept that some of these interventions are a medium term. So, like I said, the 2,100 megawatts from Kusile will come in December rather, the last unit. We are entering a very difficult period of winter. I did say when I started, and I say at its worst, peak demand could be about 37,000 megawatts. But we can guarantee 27,000 megawatts if you look at the trend line. So the deficit is about 10,000 megawatts. If you continue at this kind of efficiency, so you can improve the efficiency and then also run your open cycle gas turbines and reduce the deficit to levels that are acceptable. And levels that are acceptable, I mean, it's relative, but at least as a basic minimum, don't go beyond, worst case scenario, don't go beyond stage 6. That I can guarantee you, no, I can't say that now because units keep on tripping. I made the point when I went to Mata just the other day, in the space of 45 minutes addressing management and the workers, 1,600 megawatts just went. Close to 2 stages of load shedding. That's the problem that's confronting us. And that's why you need to create that window to address this. And I did say at the conclusion that I shared with you the interventions on the fossil fuel side and the nuclear. I took time at the beginning to say, if you look at the integrated resource plan, because that's the Bible that guides, if you like, the distribution of various technology sources from the generation side, you'll see that the share of renewables is increasing exponentially. So if we are to be told today that this PV solar power project on a megawatt to megawatt basis, base load, will be able to answer the question, then direct us to where this is. And I'm telling you, it doesn't exist. Just shared with you the profile of the energy mix. I said the renewables, they come in at 8:30 to 4:30. My peak is earlier than that in the morning and later than that in the evening. Direct us to where this solution exists. And when you do PV, you must pay it with battery, at least to attempt to give you the base load, or construct the pump stations, which in fact are most resilient than a battery. Battery gives you spend about 50 million rands per megawatt, pump storage 30 million per megawatt. Battery gives you a life of 20 years, pump storage gives us a life of 70 years. Pump storage also provides the other function of balancing the water resources. So at some point we must have an honest conversation about these technologies. It's not an average minister or some person who just doesn't know these technologies. No, we must be told the truth. Show me a country in the world that base load is supported by solar. It doesn't exist. But that does not mean that our commitment to decarbonization is undermined. I said when I started, it's in the interest of South Africa and her people and the economy. We'll make that case. If we are squashed, we are squashed, but we'll be able to illustrate in numbers. It's not a binary question. I keep on making. It's not fossil fuels or renewables. It's both. It's the pace with which you move, the extent to which you are able to replenish. I've told you that in the next 12 months or so, you could be taking out about close to 2,000 megawatts. Show me where are we going to retrieve it. The example of Komati, as I speak to you, the last unit was 100 megawatts that was taken out. In total, it was 1,000 megawatts. It's replaced by wind, solar, that combination. And then it guarantees you, at least at base load, I think it's about 170 megawatts or about 200 megawatts. So you remove 1,000 megawatts, you replace it with, let's use the high end, 250 megawatts. Tell me where's the math there? Is the interest of the country, South Africa, and her people. And that doesn't mean that we are not, we are committed. It's a decision of cabinet. Government has taken that decision. Our nationally determined contribution, our net zero path, is the pace with which you get there. That's the point that we are raising here. And then there's also an issue about, additional capacity. I've raised it. I mean, if you can get to be directed where these technology solutions from renewables, that gives you this base load. We'll be very happy to make that case in cabinet. And I did say that we are going to sit with the renewable energy complex developers to understand how best we can be able to address this situation going into the future. On the emissions issues, no, I am not saying that we are going to. I presented 3 options. The first options, as I use the example of Kendall because that's where it's more pronounced, is that it's SE's conditions. Allow us to run the car at lower efficiencies because we don't want to contaminate the environment, and accept that there's very little you can do to protect the South African economy by reducing the higher levels of load shedding, and then protect the environment. That's the one option. The other option is to say, no, but the economy is under stress, significant strain. We're going to exceed these emissions levels, and then we save this, but we are going to damage the environment. And then you are outside the legal framework, and someone must be held accountable for that. There's a rule of law in this country. The third option is to do both. Accept that I have these obligations. I want to save the country now. Allow me, give me this exemption. I must illustrate that I'm going to take the following step in the short term, and in the long term, I'll be able to remain within the confines of those parameters. I'm saying that's where part of the options that are before us. I don't make the determination on exemptions. And the party that makes that determination is independent. I have no intention of influencing, but it's about laying what these facts are on the table for us to be able to attend to them. No, I'm not suggesting there was no need for the declaration of a state of disaster. The state of disaster as a result of the electricity challenges has got multiple manifestations. Has got manifestations with regards to the provision of water in this country. We know that the reservoirs are at an elevated level, they are not gravity fed. Because of the cubic meters, the volume that needs to be pumped up there, you need electricity. We know that there's issues around the farming community. When I was sitting with them, they told me that about 23% of their revenue relies on reliable energies. That's irrigation and also maintaining the cold chain. We're sitting in this room just the other day with the original equipment manufacturer from the automotive industry and the importers, sharing with us the decline of the share of production of South Africa as a total of production on the continent. It has moved from 73%, we are at about 52 or 53% as a result of, amongst others, load shedding. They are making a case for that. I sat with one of the leading hospital groups yesterday. They're explaining to me what are the implications. So I'm just saying that no, load shedding affects all these areas. I'm saying from a generation point of view on the interventions that can be made. The things that I've shared with you, which are the top 4, top 5 interventions, did not rely on the state declaration of the state of disaster. There are interventions that Minister Patel has introduced on the one-stop shop. They remain. There are interventions that were made, the Department of Communication. They remain. When we remove the state of disaster, it does not remove those interventions that were made, because it's out of the state of disaster that you have those interventions. And in the consideration of the players in those spaces, that is sufficient for us to be able to respond. So no, not at all. Cabinet sufficiently applied itself, considered all of this, arrived at that determination. And then, as Minister Nkadime mentioned yesterday, was that it gets to be reviewed, revised all the time, reviewed all the time, and a determination was made that we need to terminate the declaration. And then on the issues of the authority, of course, Minister Mantashe is on the issues of policy. He's a custodian of the integrated resource plan. ESCOM is just a player on the integrated resource plan from a point of view of the fossil fuels, because they are participating in that area of generation, and then there are multiple players. And then Minister Mantashe is also the broader conversation around energy. Electricity is just but one small component of energy. Minister Kodan is a shareholder representative, and that's why when I started, I said, when we went to these plans, we moved with our colleagues from DPE so that we are able to illustrate a joined-up government. The President will still make that determination. He did say, as you have correctly mentioned, when he announced the introduction of the ministry, that he will reassign those responsibilities. So it's not my space. I'm not about to venture into that space. It's a domain that is exclusively that of the President, and he'll make that determination. On the energy action plan, so what we're going to do, like I said, when we go to Cabinet, we think that there were targets that were set out. We want to, on the basis of the options that we are presenting before them, we are able to illustrate how these targets can be revised, either upwards or downwards, or maintained. So that's a conversation we'll have, and I'm sure that once we complete that, we should be in a position to share with you exactly what that means going into the future. I did make the point that on the units that are being discontinued, that there's a case for you to ask the market what is possible. And that's not a subtraction from what Minister Godongwa and I said. And as you have correctly mentioned, that's an option that is before the table. And I must underscore that that does not amount to privatization of that fossil fuel space. It's about the participation of the market. And there are various options that are there: build, operate, transfer. Essentially, the people continue to own that asset going into the future. And then, yes, Heidi, I did make the point around the winter projections. I think you can see that it's going to become a very difficult winter, also from ESCOM's projection. One of the things that is understated is the possibilities we are having on the demand side. We're talking with Salga, we're talking with the energy intense users. And the point there is that if you look at households, for an example, our modeling suggests that they consume about 16% of installed capacity at peak, they can consume up to 35%, and up to 30% of that 35% comes from the geysers. There's technology that exists that allows to remotely switch off the geysers, not to draw from the grid. And in terms of that modeling, there's significant amount of megawatts that can be saved. Anything conservatively from 2,500 megawatts, optimistically up to 4,000 megawatts. And that's why when I started, I said we're doing both, ramping up generation and attempting to bring down demand without undermining the ability of households to meet their own needs and businesses to meet the shareholder returns, but essentially getting the South African economy going. I think I've answered all of them. Thanks.
No, Minister, can I come in? I'm sorry. We asked about
can you just hold on?
Oh,
sure. There's a question online. Kutlana, if you can just read it from Carol Payton.
There are two questions. One is from Linda Esno from Business Day. The question reads, given the number of allegations about corruption at Eskom power stations, why does the minister not mention this as a contributing factor to the low electricity generation and high levels of load shedding? Does the high levels of corruption have a negative impact on Eskom's ability to invest in these power stations? The second one is from Carol Patton from News 24. South Africa committed to the nationally determined contributions at COP26. Ambitious goals rely on all power stations meeting their decommission dates, plus early retirement of Tutuka. How do you think these objectives of energy security and the nationally determined contributions should be balanced?
Thanks, SABC.
thank you. I wanted to find out about the term. When are you going to be approaching Cabinet for this declaration of, or some of these issues that you found out? And also the issue of the army, to say that what were your findings? Are they staying there? And it's also linked to issues of corruption that was asked by my colleague here, Kutlana, through the Business Day. Thank you.
Is there a follow-up?
No, I just wanted to ask about the corruption in the army. If the minister could just touch on that. Thank you.
Okay, now let me start. I think Linda was not on the call when I started the meeting. When I met the situation at Kusile and Medupi on the premature failure of components, on the fact that they are not the original parts that are used there, I said they can be associated to incidents of corruption that took place before during construction. And I did make the point that there are people who are before the courts, and the courts will make that determination. That's what I said. So I don't know what more should I say. So essentially trying to illustrate that there is that link, and it's more pronounced when you get to Kusile and Medupi. On the version of management, I have no reason to doubt them. So I've said that. And then on the issues around the army, I don't have jurisdiction on when is the army getting to be deployed, what the reports are. They don't get to report to me. I think the Commander-in-Chief and the Minister of Defense is the one who will receive those reports. And when I get to stations, I really don't interfere with that space. And when I made the power stations, when they raise issues of the possibility of or suspicion that there could be issues of corruption, one of the things that I do immediately, like I picked up when I was one of the power station, Tutuka in particular, when the matter was raised, was to elevate it to one of our work stream, which is work stream number 9. That is populated by competent people who have an appreciation of what it takes to address and deal with corruption. So all that I do is to elevate it. I neither have the capacity nor the mandate to do that. But on the technical engineering side, that's my area of competency. I'm more prolific there, and that's why we can speak with some degree of confidence on how we see the technical solutions on how we want to deal with the load shedding. Just to Carol Ms. Payton there, I mean, it's a brilliant question. So the point I'm making is that, and I did say that at the end, so we have made commitments to the nationally determined contribution in the net zero part. So the point I'm saying, I'm not tampering with that, and I don't have the capacity to tamper with that because it's a country commitment. All I'm saying is that there has to be a think around the aggressiveness with which we are going to achieve that. And of course, it will have by implications whether the timelines that are there are the timelines that we can meet. First, our obligations to the environment and posterity, but also our obligation to the South African economy. And in fashioning these choices that I referred to above on what we think should be the case, we also relate to what are the implications to those timelines as codified in the NDC, as codified in the net zero path. And it's up to the competent body, which is cabinet, to make that determination. So I have no intention through a media briefing to interfere or revise those, but I'm simply mapping out what we are confronted with, and what we think is the most plausible interventions that we can make without inflicting additional injury to the South African economy, but also without abrogating our commitments to the environment and the multiple commitments that we have made at international fora. I've done the fossil part. We are going to do the part on the renewable energy complex, that is additional generation, including the part of the possibility of importing power from neighboring countries. We've got to be, if you like, approached by parties that say, look, this is what is possible. We'll examine those, the technical feasibility of those issues. We are engaging with the commercial banks, the DFI in particular, IDC, DBSA, the NEF. We'll be engaging with the NYDA on the issues of demand side. Once I pull all of that together, I'll be able to go to cabinet. I'm confident that I should go to cabinet before the end of April. Of course, as we do that, there are interventions that are being made. So this must not be misunderstood as something not being done. We still have something called the Energy Action Plan, and the minister has been appointed to execute against that plan. All we are saying is this enhancement, Tembile, on what is possible going into the future with regards to the timelines of the Energy Action Plan. Thanks.
I think there was one last question.
No.
Oh, a second last one. You go first, please.
If you will indulge me, Minister, please, on the refurbishment that you're referring to, yes, it is the domain of the Finance Minister. He will have to find that money, but how much will he be asking?
Oh, yes.
Thanks, Minister. Terence Creamer, Engineering News. Just on the issue of meeting with the other components of the electricity supply industry, which is in massive generational change. We've never seen change like this. So we need to speak to the other components, not just the fossil and the nuclear. When will that happen, and who are the sounding boards that you're going to be meeting with before you take this revised plan to Cabinet? So you said before the end of April you want to take this to Cabinet, but when will you be meeting and who will you be meeting with? And then just a question around the life extension thing and the philosophical framework that you're taking. You know, anything for an engineer is technically possible, but it doesn't mean it's financially doable or socially or environmentally desirable to take those actions. And you used the example of a motor vehicle. And there's a time when the insurance company with the owner decides it's better to scrap that vehicle rather than to try and extend its life. And you know, those are real decisions that you take from a financial, and from a benefit perspective, as well as the fact that there's a diminishing return, making a massive investment. And generally what we would do to make a massive investment in a vintage car is that you're going to try to use that as little as possible. You're going to keep it in the garage, keep it painted, not doing what we've done here, gone outside of the service manual, not maintained to the service manual. When they are available, use at very high utilization factors, which deepens the maintenance backlog. And then you're wanting to go to banks and insurance companies or even concessionaires and say extend the life. Do you think it's, one, financially doable, and two, is it desirable from a social perspective? Because on a cost-benefit analysis, technically it is possible to have a system led by your cheapest new electrons, which is solar, wind, and backed up with some form of flexible generation. You know that. That's technically possible. But from a cost-benefit analysis, sure, you need to do that as Minister of Energy before you start talking about life extensions of something that's been overused, under-maintained, and possibly has a huge difficulty in funding. Thank you.
And I do that exceptionally well. So what you are not answering and telling everyone is in that computation, it's a one-dimensional approach. You say the life extension, what it costs, you will not be able to generate the amount of efficiency that are required. Then answer the next question, don't leave it there. Answer the next question, what is the cost to the South African economy for not providing the kind of energy that is required? And I've computed what that is. So essentially we're talking about now where we are, 550 billion rands per annum of unserviced energy. There's cost to farmers. They do make the point that there's a relationship between the food price inflation and load shedding. The South African Reserve Bank that the economy is barely growing because of load shedding. So it's a totality of all of this. So it's not just, and also from what is socially acceptable. People are out of jobs. There are families today that don't know where to get their next meal as a result of, amongst others, load shedding. So that's a computation. It's a complex computation. It's not just an engineering solution. That is confronting us. And my obligation, I have an obligation as an engineer, and I'm also a social scientist. And I bring all of those together and say this is what is possible. Ultimately, Cabinet will make that determination. And that's the point that I'm simply making. It's a totality of this. I did say when I started, and I'm making this public, I keep on going out to people, just direct me to a country in the world whose base loads is almost exclusively supported by renewables. And I really want to be educated, and I accept that I might have those limitations. And then we have a different conversation, and the speed with which that can come. Car. Yes, sir, it's got its own problems, but this car, we can invest in it, and it buys us some time as we seek for those solutions. And that's the point that I'm making. We are mapping all of this before us. Let me finish. I'm mapping all of this before us so that we are able to get the answers to this question. Tembile, I don't have the answer. I have not computed what it will take from the CAPEX point of view, and that's a conversation that I'm sure what Cabinet will say. Okay, if you think that this is we can do the numbers. We are attempting to do that even before we go, because we already know, for an example, when you go from one station to the other, they tell us that this is our CAPEX schedule. If you are to do the following, then you are in a position to achieve this and that. I think that was, and then yes, Kenneth, I'm guided by the Presidential Climate Commission is directing me to the players in that space, so we'll engage with them. I'm just saying, even if anyone here has a knowledge of who are these players, where are they organized, we are more than happy to engage with them as an organized voice. Because in some instances we know that there are stranded electrons as a result of the deficiencies or deficits, if you like, on the grid side. There has to be investments in that space, and of course we know that the balance sheet of ESCOM might not be able to accommodate the kind of investments that are required there. When we were speaking to one of the commercial banks in this country, they said they've done a study, and that study suggests that you need up to 100 billion rands just to strengthen the grid. We haven't gone into details of how they've arrived at that. So I think it's a conversation that we'll have with the players in that space, and then they'll also say to us, look, we are able to bring the following on stream, but this is the hurdle rate from a policy and regulatory point of view. And yesterday when we were giving the briefing on the state of disaster determination supporting Minister Nkadime, we made the point that there's a provision in the Infrastructure Development Act that allows us to truncate that process of permitting and licensing without necessarily invoking what would have been the provision of the state of disaster. So there's existing pieces of legislation. If read together, they'll be able to help us to address some of the challenges in the space.
Sorry, thank you, Minister. It's Mary Mesa from Business Intelligence. My one question wasn't answered. Even if you put aside the issues of the money and the energy transition and all of that and the environment, all of that aside, to do the maintenance, to put more money into maintenance, you need more generation capacity to take units offline. And this is one of the problems that we've seen at Eskom over the past couple of years, with things breaking down everywhere. You just don't have the space to take things offline and avoid severe load shedding. Where is this generation capacity going to come from?
There's one of the things that gets to be discussed is that emergency procurement of additional generation. That's the first part. The second one is that, of course, it must be guarded how I say this. You must, if you look at the stages of load shedding now, we've been oscillating between 3 and 4. And you would have seen that in that instance, Eskom was almost going on planned maintenance, not running these units all the way. So essentially, you need to have a conversation, and that conversation we haven't had internally, I must admit. To say that what is that maximum level of load shedding that of course, you take it as a given that your generation is not sufficient to meet your demand. And as you take out these units, of course, you are elevating the amount of the levels of load shedding. You need to then compute what is that which is acceptable. We haven't had that conversation on what that level is, which level is acceptable, because generally the philosophy is that load shedding in all its manifestation, whether level 1 or 2, is unacceptable, because we need to get the South Africa's economy going. You are absolutely correct. When you go to the power stations, they tell you about this unit, I can take it out, I can do this maintenance, but I'm advised, please keep it running because it's at the great. And then the other consideration is around I did say, I think it's 2016 to 18 or so, 13 to 16 or so, when we ran the open cycle gas turbine, they've got huge costs, which in my view are inordinate. And I don't think that the fiscals will be able to carry that. So I'm just saying there's a multiplicity of options, but the net result is what you are saying, which answer does not exist now. You must create an opportunity for us to take out these units and return them. And as we speak now, that opportunity doesn't exist. And that's part of the conversation that we will be having with some of the experts who are joining us on board, and the plant managers. Those are important players in this conversation, to say this is what we think is possible to allow us to create that opportunity. And once we make that determination, I think we can be in a position to communicate to the country.
Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you, everyone. You can speak to myself or Kutano for any other queries that you'd like to take forward. But thanks for your time. Have a lovely day. And enjoy your Easter holidays. And drive safe.
Oh. Next. And get a picture.